Good morning, members. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee of 25th of January 2023. This meeting is being live streamed and will be made available on the Council website for public viewing. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you're not addressing the meeting, writing speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you're in the hall, you can do this on your iPhone or iPad. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you rejoin the meeting so we can keep track of whether the meeting is quorate. All members should speak clearly and directly into the microphone when making contributions, and when referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. Nick, can you confirm the sediment? Apologies, and I approve the remote participation of members at this meeting today.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. In the hall, we have 12 members. On Teams, we have Councillors Blake, Carruthers, Dashper, Hill, Marshall and Walters. We have 2 members not present at the start of the meeting, being Andrew Giusti and Andrew Wood.
Thank you, Nick. Declarations of interest. I had an email from Councillor Wood declaring interest in agenda item 4 because he was close friends with one of the landowners. So that might be the reasons for his absence at this time, but he already indicated he had a declaration of interest. I've got Councillor Dryborough and Councillor Howie.
Yeah, Chair, it's on item 4 as well. I used to be Vice Chair of VNR and I did meet with Aldi as part of that particular role, but it hadn't anything to do with this particular application, but it's just to advise. I did have meetings with Aldi representatives, but I believe my interest is such a stay in and make decisions on this.
Thank you, Archie. Councillor Dryborough. Councillor Howie.
Chair, declaring interest. My support for this application is well known, but I believe I'll speak on the issue and thereafter depart the chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Howie. Thanks, Ian. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, we move on to agenda item 3, the minute of previous meeting, 14th of December 2022 for approval. Members, is this a true record and are you content to approve that minute? Thank you, everyone. Okay, we move on to agenda item number 4. This is an application for land at Oakwell Road, Castle Douglas. Oh, Councillor Dryborough.
Chair, I think the clerk needs to go through the process first before you get on to that.
You're absolutely right. Thank you. That was an oversight and my fault. Can you take us through the procedure for today, Nick, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Dryborough. Yes, the Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chair has been provided with a list of eligible representors who have registered to speak at this meeting within the period specified in Council policy. No other persons will be allowed to speak. The Chair will invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members, but no questions may be asked of members. The order of the eligible parties being heard will be as follows. So Firstly, third parties objecting to an application. Next, third parties supporting an application. Next, statutory consultees objecting to an application. Next, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee. Such members should withdraw from the meeting after making their presentation. Followed by applicants or their agents. Representatives were offered the option of attending today's meeting in person, joining remotely via MS Teams, or to provide a written statement to be read out on their behalf. And a copy of the public speaking list is available from the committee officer taking notes of our proceedings, and this has been uploaded to the Teams chat for those on Teams. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, excepting for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, where the time limit will be 5 minutes. The chair of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you are taking too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the council when deciding on an application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all the representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members of the public may address the committee from the public gallery. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Nick. Thanks for that, Archie. Move on to agenda item number 4, an application for the erection of Class 1 retail food store, including formation of parking area, alterations to existing access, landscaping and associated works at land at Oakwell Road, Castle Douglas. Application types: full application. Applicant is Aldi Stores Limited. The reference number is 22/0121/full. The recommendation is to refuse, and the case officer would have been Andrew Robinson. However, he's no longer with the council, so David Sutty will address the committee in place of Andrew Robinson. We did have a request for a deferral from the applicant, but in consultation with the Vice Chair, I've decided that this will not be granted and we will move to determining this application today. There was a late representation from another major retailer that has been posted on the council website. I am sure each of you will have the opportunity to view it had you accessed the website, and the applicant here today, their agents, will be able to address any of the points raised in the objection when they get the opportunity to speak to committee later today. And of course, any member of the committee will have the opportunity to pose questions to the applicant when their opportunity to speak presents itself. So, moving forward, David Sutty will take us through the presentation today. Oh, Councillor Marshall, you have your hand up. Do you want to speak?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It was really just when you mentioned about the request for deferral by the applicant. Are you able to elaborate on the reasons why they wanted a deferral?
They asked for the deferral to allow them the opportunity to respond to a late representation by another retailer, but Mr. Sutty will give you a more detailed response, Sean.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there was a late representation from agents on behalf of Tesco. Tesco had not submitted any objection to the application at the appropriate time, which actually the period for that expired on the 31st of March last year. However, about 3 hours or so after the agenda was published online, we received this late representation. So clearly that couldn't be included in the report or the issues raised addressed. And as a result of that, the applicant's agent requested a deferral to allow them to actually comment on this late representation, which they considered to be material. However, they were equally offered the opportunity to provide a response to it, which they did. That's been on the Council's website since Monday. So certainly they will also, unlike Tesco, have the opportunity to address the committee today. Tesco being a late objector, they're not entitled to speak. So for those reasons, I consider that you've got all the information that you have that you need to safely determine the application before you today. And as I say, the applicants have the right of response, which Tesco's don't.
Thanks, David. And I'm sure everyone received a direct email from Aldi in response to that late objection anyway. So we should all have had the opportunity to read that in advance of the meeting. Hope that's all right, Sean?
Excellent, thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you very much. Okay, David, if you can take us through your presentations, please, in the absence of Andrew Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Retail planning is quite a specialist field, and a bit like a number 20 bus, you don't get any for a while and then you get two come along at once. So there are two on the agenda today, albeit very different applications. So you will hear terms that may be unfamiliar to you, especially new members of committees, such as sequential test, convenience goods and comparison goods, quantitative and qualitative overtrading and undertrading and so on. So it is quite a complex thing. As the Chair alluded to, the case officer for both these applications was Andrew Robinson. Andrew completed both these reports before he left the Council just around 10 days ago. Andrew was something of our office expert on retail matters, and case officers normally present their own cases. Obviously that can't happen here. So I will try my very best to answer any queries that you have of issues in Andrew's report, but apologies in advance if I don't fully know the background to some of the comments he's made on the finer details of the report. So the application site is located off Oakwell Road in Castle Douglas. That's the A745. And the application is for the erection of a Class 1 retail food store and the associated works. The food store would be 1,883 square metres gross floor area or 1,315 square metres net floor area. The site is identified in Local Development Plan 2 as established business and industrial land. It presently has a joiner's workshop on part of the site and a garden centre on the other part. It's an out-of-centre location in terms of the sequential test, in terms of distance from the Castle Douglas town centre. So the next slide is the location plan in more detail. So you can see in the site there are presently two rectangular buildings. The one on the left-hand side is the joiner's workshop, with the garden centre being on the right-hand side. And that's the proposed site layout. So you've got at the bottom of the slide there, you've got the access to Oakwell Road, and you can see that the supermarket building itself is proposed on the sort of northwestern boundary, and you've got car parking for the public in front, and then the servicing area to the rear of the building. These are the elevations of the proposed store. You'll notice in the report that amendments were sought during the application to try and provide a bit more architectural articulation on the elevations to provide some more interest in different materials. So that has been done. And these are streetscape elevations in the context of how you would actually see it from Oakwell Road and within the site. Also proposed are off-site works, which are basically just adding in a formal footway to Torres Road, where that isn't a formal footway at the moment. Moving on to some photos. First couple were taken from Google Street View, so you can see this is looking towards the Dalbeatty side of the A745 application site on your left there from the road. And you've got the joiner's workshop first and then the garden centre next. And this is looking the other way round, so that's looking more into the site, so you can see there at an angle to the road. And then these were some photos which Andrew took himself. So this is going further into the site, joiner's workshop on the left, garden centre on the right. And panning round from that same view, that's looking towards 17 Oakwell Road, the residential property adjoining the site. This is going through the site and looking back, so you're now looking at the other end with the garden centre on your left-hand side, joiners on the right, and you're looking toward Birkland Road properties on the other side of the E745. Within the site now, where it's looking west towards the properties on Oakwell Road, Oakwell Park, and looking west, again, the northern end of the site. So you can see it's quite an area of land at the moment, which is just presently used for car parking and storage. Going back down to the entrance, this is looking towards the town centre side of Castle Douglas from the existing entrance, and then turning round 180 degrees from that, you're looking towards the Dalbeatty side, so you can see the present visibility there. And this is the area on Torres Road where the off-site works are proposed. So on the right-hand side of the photo there, where you've got a grassed area, that would become a footway. And that's looking down the other way into Torres Road, where that would become the formal footway. So quite a few issues to run over this one. Firstly, obviously, I'm well aware of you can't not be well aware of the very strong local support for an Aldi supermarket in Castle Douglas, and members will have received a substantial volume of communications from the public to this effect. So as officers, clearly we understand and appreciate the degree of support for a discount food store. However, planning permission runs with the land, not the applicant. So what is before members today is purely an application for the erection of a Class 1 retail food store, and that has to be separated from who the applicant is. So there's no separate use class for a discount food store. It's all within the same use class, Class 1. So the present applicant may be Aldi, but once planning permission is granted, the store could be implemented or used by any other retail operator. So it could be a Waitrose. Thank you. It could be a Waitrose, Sainsbury, any other operator. You could not attach a condition to restrict its use being to Aldi only. That's quite clearly set out in Circular 4, 1998 of the Scottish Government. So you can change hands for a supermarket once it's on site. Some 25 years ago, I dealt with an application on the former auction mart in Annan, and the applicant at that time was Safeway. Nobody ever foresaw at that time that Safeway would cease trading, but they did, and it then became a Summerfield, then became a Co-op, and now it's an Aldi, all in the same building without needing any planning permission for a change of use. So it's just to make you aware you're looking today at a Class 1 retail use, not a discount store, and you've got to set aside who the applicant is. One thing which was raised by Tesco in their objection, which I had actually already spotted myself, and I would have to offer a correction to one of Andrew's comments. It's on page 32 of your agenda and paragraph 4.6. On rereading it, I don't consider actually to be accurate what's said. It's, whilst the proposal clearly would not be considered industrial, no definition is provided in the Council's development plan as to what use class business covers. It could therefore be considered to be quite wide-ranging and cover business in general, which the proposal can reasonably be considered to fall under. The site is clearly identified in Local Development Plan 2 as an established business and industry site. There is a definition of what business and industry means, and that's in paragraph 101 of Scottish Planning Policy, and that restricts it to Class 4 business, Class 5 general industrial, and use class 6, storage and distribution of the town and country planning use classes, Scotland Order 1997. So retail is not a business use. it falls within Class 1 retail of the same order. So it is a material consideration that part of the site already has a non-conforming existing Class 1 retail use, namely the garden centre. But the joiner's workshop I would normally regard to be a Class 5 general industrial use. And it's got to be recognised that there would be a loss to the B&I site in the local development plan. The relevant policy to that is ED1, and ED1A requires, amongst other things, that the development must be compatible with business or industrial uses and not result in a material loss of business and industrial land. There then go on to be 4 tests to be applied as to whether or not an alternative use is going to be acceptable. And those include things such as the plot containing a building previously used for a business or industrial use. Well, that's a take. You've got the joiner's workshop. Plot has been disused for at least 12 months. It's been demonstrated that despite marketing of the site for at least 12 months, there's been no viable interest of other business and industrial uses. And finally, that the alternative use would not be materially detrimental to the specific character and amenity of the immediate area. However, paragraph 4.6 of the report, which Andrew did, goes on to correctly point out that requirement for at least 12 months marketing of the site has been suspended. That was agreed at Economy and Resources Committee, and it's suspended until June 2023. So accordingly, whilst the proposal does represent a loss of some business industrial site from an allocated site, really the only part you would need to consider of policy ED1A, I would suggest, is the last one, that the alternative use would not be materially detrimental to the specific character and amenity of the immediate area, and that those issues are covered elsewhere in the report. So the report is detailed and comprehensive. In summary, the physical elements of the development are considered to be acceptable, subject to appropriate conditions. There's a clear potential positive elements of the proposal in terms of the socio-economic benefits, and those are recognised in paragraph 4.38. The sequential assessment of alternative sites provided by the applicant is considered to be acceptable. So really it boils down to the sole area of concern, and the reason for the recommendation of refusal is the potential impact of both individually and cumulatively on the vitality and viability of the town centre of Castle Douglas, and accordingly whether or not the proposal conforms with the town centre first principles set out in Local Development Plan 2, Policy ED6, Scottish Planning Policy, and the revised draft National Planning Framework 4. That's also covered in the report as well. Basically, National Planning Framework 4 has now been approved by the Scottish Parliament, but it does not yet form part of the development plan. It is a material consideration, so that is covered in the report. This assessment of the effect on the town centre really is the bulk of the report, paragraph 416 to 431. As set out in paragraph 430, there's a clear divergence of opinion on the issue between the applicant's agent and the council's independent retail consultant. This is the same consultant, incidentally, who did all the background work for the council for the retail study in Local Development Plan 2, so he does have experience and knowledge of the area. Both recognise that there would be an impact on the town centre as a result of trade. Yeah, okay. So both recognise there would be an impact on the town centre as a result of trade diversion away from the independent retailers, but it's the predicted extent which is disputed. The applicant's agent suggested it would be a 6.5% impact. The independent retail consultant says 38. That was challenged by the applicant's agent, but even allowing for the current undertrading in the catchment, it would still be 20% impact on the town centre trading, which is considered to be significant. So really, it's on that basis and in line with local and national town centre first policies that the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, David. And apologies, members. I've got a cold of some description. I'm on antibiotics, but whether or not it's working will be a different thing. So we've got questions for our case officer. John Campbell, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, David, for taking us through the report. 4.6 did worry me slightly when it says it partially benefits from Class 1, but you explained that because there's one particular workshop there that's under another classification. However, the Class 1 that's already there, how much or what percentage of the actual area is under Class 1? Thanks.
David.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe go back to the... I can't give you an exact percentage without being able to calculate it, but what you can see there is that an estimate, I would say, probably around 50 to at very most 60%. You've got the line going around on the left-hand side there, the joiner's workshop. So as far as I'm aware, that is the area which is the Class 5 use. The garden centre is the building there on the right-hand side rectangle. The extent of their ownership within the site, I honestly don't know, so I wouldn't be able to give an exact breakdown. Clearly, the applicant's agents have put store on the fact that there's a fallback position that they could go into the garden centre and use that as a store. They could. I think in reality that's such a size of store, size of building that it wouldn't reasonably meet their demands. But it's undeniable there is a retail element as part of that site.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, John. Any other questions? Pauline Drysdale, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, David, for your clarification of a number of things. I'd like to ask two questions. The report details two retail assessments. The one submitted by the applicant supports their position that any displacement from traders on King Street will be minimal, and in fact, the development of the new store would improve linked trips and avoid potential leakage of up to 11.2 million. On the other hand, whilst a slightly older study carried out by Roderick McLean Associates Limited on behalf of the Council not surprisingly supports the Council's stance on LDP2, which was adopted before COVID, the cost of living crisis and the war in Ukraine. It's disappointing not to see this dealt with in the report by the Council, as the retail environment and consumer buying patterns have so drastically changed. So the question I'd like to ask, David, if it's okay, is how much did the report cost? Why were there only 63 people consulted in that report? And what date was it undertaken, please? Did it involve open-ended questioning of members of the community? As in my eyes, it did not, which is evident in the lack of qualitative data. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. David?
Well, in terms of the cost, that's confidential and business-sensitive information, so I won't be passing that on. The commission was for him to go and independently assess the applications, the applicant's own survey. It's not to go and undertake another rival one. It was there to actually assess what had been submitted. I think what you can clearly see is that both recognise that there would be an impact. It's obviously you've got one party that has a vested interest, being the applicant, and what we're trying to get here is an independent view as to whether or not the assessment is correct. Now, clearly there's a divergence there. That's something which members will have to take on board. Things such as cost of living crisis and war in Ukraine and all those things, these are temporal matters. You're looking at a permanent siting of a building on that site. So you'd have a supermarket there for the foreseeable future, many decades. So that's really what you've got to consider. It's a Class 1 supermarket on that site. It's largely immaterial who would actually be operating it, and whether or not they're a discount trader or not it's purely a supermarket, and that's what you've got to assess.
Thanks, Pauline. I see Councillor Carruthers with a hand up. Ian, Councillor Carruthers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief one, David. Just in the back of the comment made there about not passing that information on. I think that's fair enough to say that in public, but my understanding is that the councillors, being the council, are entitled to all the information if requested, whether it's privately in an email or whatever type of correspondence. It probably needs to be corrected, that, I think, David. So I think if we do ask for that information, we're entitled to it, but I think correctly, not in public.
David?
Nothing further to add, Chair.
Nothing further to add, Ian. Councillor Marshall, Sean?
Yeah, thank you. Could I ask David, I'm just looking at 4.25, which is the IRC report, and it estimates a figure of 38% with regards to the level of impact on the high street in Castle Douglas. I'm just wondering, I know there is a lot of local footfall, obviously, but has anything been taken into account because of the uniqueness of Castle Douglas as a food town, and therefore there will be a larger than normal footfall, which I don't think they'll be wanting to go to Tesco or Aldi or the Co-op. They'll be wanting to visit the independent retailers along King Street. And I'm just wondering if that's been factored in, because I don't think it would make any difference to the footfall from visitors because they go to visit the Castle Douglas food town.
Thanks, Sean. David?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, Castle Douglas is quite unique, I would say, in the region. It is recognised as the food town. It has a higher than normal number of independent stores on the main street, King Street. There is, however, only a finite spend within the catchment area. So there will be an element of displacement. If you've got a town with a population of around about 4,000, admittedly with a wider hinterland in the Stuart around there as well, then the information we have is that you couldn't support having 3 supermarkets in the town without it having an adverse impact on the existing traders. And because of the character of Castle Douglas having such a strong independent element to it, there is some concern that would be the area that might be affected.
Thanks, Sean. Councillor Drysdale, did you want to come back in?
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, David. It was just to draw members' attention to page 31, 4.3. And the question I'm going to ask is as follows. The LDP2 states that its vision is to have a successful regional capital in Dumfries. Does this in turn mean that anything with commercial viability that threatens Dumfries gets opposed? So it's the last point in 4.3, just to clarify that, please. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. David?
Well, the first 2 points above that, as the vision is Dumfries and Galloway will be a viable rural economy and have vibrant towns and villages. So clearly that's also as much a focus as the recognition that with the size of Dumfries, it is the regional capital.
Thanks, Pauline. Stephen Thompson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Taking into account the discussions about the independent studies and what the applicants offered as well, obviously I suppose we have to consider how much weight we give to those considerations against other considerations within our policy. So just on 4.38 in terms of the socio-economic benefits which are there in the report, irrespective of the independent retail studies, this seems to suggest that there's actually a generation of full-time equivalent jobs, not just for the short term during the construction phase, but over the piece. And just on the back of the viable rural economy and vibrant communities, that would seem to be, it's really a question as to, do we take this as separate and in addition to the consideration of the independent retail study, because this is another element in and of itself, or is this included in the independent retail study? Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. David?
Well, hopefully in my summing up at the start there, I made it clear that this is an application that definitely has pros as well as cons. And the socio-economic benefits set out in paragraph 4.38 clearly are something that are very much in its favour. The only issue I'd probably flag up is the fact that whilst it may create new jobs, is that going to be displacement? Is it going to be as a result of, will it have the impact on existing retail activities ceasing to trade, and therefore you haven't actually got a net gain there? But obviously, as with all these things, it is probably worth stressing that what you've got is a forecast from the applicant on the impact. You've got a forecast from the independent retail consultant on his opinion. But none of us actually know. This is all forecasts as to what the likely impact is. But what I do come back to is all parties are agreed that there will be an impact on the town centre.
Stephen?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, David, thank you. I think it was, there's a specificity about the figures in the socio-economic benefits in terms of jobs creation, for example, but it's not evident from in the report from the figures from the independent retail consultant. While there's a figure in terms of turnover, that doesn't always necessarily equate to the number of jobs. So it's not, I don't think it's the same as comparing, apples and apples, as it were. So it's really just to get that clarification from yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Do you want to add anything, David?
No, quite happy, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Any? Pauline?
Apologies coming in again. Thanks for letting me speak, Chair. I just wanted to make a note at present. Is that applicable during this part of the procedures, or can I do that later, Chair?
You want to make a what, Pauline?
A point, just a point.
Well, there's just questions for the case officer.
Okay, that's fine. So
I
I'll hold
reckon
it
you
till
make your
later.
point when we're in session, probably.
That's fine. Thanks, Chair.
There'll be plenty of opportunities, I'm sure, to come back. Any other questions for our case officer, John, please?
Thanks for letting me back in, Chair. Yeah, just a quick one on page 34, paragraph 4.14, which really follows on from the previous paragraph where the applicant did look at some of the existing sites. There's two at the edge of the centre of the town and one in the town centre, or part of the town centre. What I just don't understand in the report in 4.14 is about halfway down it says that further evidence could reasonably have been included by the applicant to demonstrate that these particular sites weren't suitable. I don't know what more could have been teased out from the applicant, in my view, because looking at these three particular sites, they're all small in size, and whether the car park would be available is, I don't know, is it suitable? I mean, a loss of car park that would further encroach parking on the street, but however, I'm not sure how Andrew was particularly looking for more evidence. I don't know if David can assist with that.
I think there's a question in there, David.
I think as much as anything, it was probably the availability, the irregular shaped site. I mean, the first two of the sites were very rapidly discounted. I think it was really just the Queen Street one that Andrew had some further queries about whether there was any possibility of it being used. But ultimately in 415, it's concluded that there are no suitable sites in a preferential location.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the clarification.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Councillor Carruthers, and then hopefully we can move on.
Thanks, Chair. I just come back to David mentioned earlier. Thanks, David, for mentioning 4.30, so 4.30, and it's the conflict of information that's there. So I think what he did say was it was the same consultants that undertook this study. But say the extent of this dispute is between the applicant, the consultants are saying 6.5% and the IRC is saying 38%. If it was 6.5% impact, David, what impact would that have on the recommendation which is with us today? Would it have any? Thank you, Chair.
Maybe speculating, David, but what's the answer?
Well, certainly from the independent retail consultant's perspective, he would regard 20% impact as being significant. So 6.5% is obviously lower than that. This is obviously the crux of the matter, and what members will have to get their head around today is, do you consider that the assessment provided by the applicant, who is saying 6.5%, is the correct one? And is that 6.5% something that you're prepared to accept for other socioeconomic benefits? Or have you got concerns, as officers do, that the level of displacement from existing activities is going to be such that it does represent a genuine threat to the town centre?
Thanks, Ian. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Stephen Thompson.
Right, and forgive me for extending this, but just on that, I think the two figures there, I mean, there was much made in some of the applicant submissions about the amount of travel to Dumfries or other centres to fulfil that particular retail market, if you like, in terms of customers. It's hard for me to know how much weight or quantification to give that in terms of what difference that would make, because I would guess that a lot of the independent retail shops have quite a specialist customer base, and general retail, whether it's budget or otherwise, seems to have a market share that fights amongst itself. Now, that's maybe a very crude understanding, but if there's a potential that it reduces the impact of unnecessary road travel to support a local economy in a district centre or whatever, and maybe that's something for members to weigh up during deliberations, but it's just not clear in the report as such how much those elements come into it. But maybe David can maybe assist me briefly on this one. Thanks, Chair.
I don't think it's an exact science, but David, can you help Stephen?
Yes, you're correct, Chair. It isn't an exact science. What is undeniable is that there's an element of leakage from the Stewartry catchment area to Dumfries. You'll notice in the report that actually the Stewartry catchment falls within the bigger Dumfries catchment area for retail. And that will always be the case because you've got a greater variety of shops, you've got different shops. That means that people will travel into Dumfries for certain activities. You'll never entirely get rid of that. But yes, it's a valid point that the applicants put forward, that you would potentially be reducing some transport out with the catchment area in the Stewartry. You'd be retaining that in there. In fact, maybe I think the applicants themselves recognise one store that would be affected would be their own one at Maxwelltown, because people would, from the Stewartry, probably go there. There are two Aldi stores within Dumfries, but that's the nearest one for them. So it is recognised that it would have an impact on themselves as far as that goes. But yes, they are both forecasts. They are their best guess, but beyond that, I'm afraid I can't pin it down in any more detail.
Thanks, Stephen. I had to hope to move on. I hope we're not going to get bogged down in specifics here in trying to unravel a too professional analysis. I've got Andy McFarlane, Tony Barretti, and then David, and then I am going to move on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. Point 4.19 says that there'll be a diversion of £2.9 million from Tesco's and 1.8 million from the co-op. But when we go to point 4.2.1, it says that the town centre value, the current turnover is 3.5 million. Is there a conflict? Because the 2.9, the 1.8, to my calculation, is 4.7 million. So is there an issue with those figures? Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. David?
You're probably getting down into the level of detail now, which I warned at the start, I'm not the author of the report. So, there clearly will be a diversion from existing stores. Undoubtedly, Tesco and Co-op are probably going to have the biggest impact. There will be ones that are out with the area as well. It is a forecast. Nobody knows for sure exactly what the impact would be.
Thanks, Andy. Tony?
Thank you, Chair. Going back to what Councillor Thompson pointed out and others in 4.30, page 37, and it's the unpredictability of knowing what the future is. I think also it's not just Dumfries that customers are going to in Castle Douglas, they're going outside also towards Newton Stewart and Stranraer. When that's clear, I've seen that when shopping. And the impact of the last 3 years has changed the commercial scene, which I don't know if anyone can come back. The other point, last point.
This is a question for David.
Well, hopefully. Has the impact of actually people staying in and not using their fuel, because going to Dumfries or going anywhere else is a saving, and therefore would that saving have been calculated into those figures? Would they be spending more?
Some folk might take it just as a day out. So again, it's a speculation, but David, can you speculate for Tony?
That is one aspect which I don't think we're shying away from that. That has the potential upside of it, is that if you are retaining more spend within the area, if there's less leakage going to other retail catchment areas, then it will reduce travel, so that there is that aspect to it. Again, it's one of these things, how do you actually quantify that? There will always be an element of people having to go further for specific things that they would get in Dumfries or elsewhere that they wouldn't be able to get within the catchment, that this particular proposal wouldn't deliver. But yeah, it's a valid point that if it works as the applicants hope, it would reduce the level of travel out with the area and have a knock-on effect that way.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That means it's a day in Castle Douglas as opposed to a day outside of Castle Douglas.
Thanks, Tony. David Slater, and then we're moving on.
I think most of the questions have been answered, Chair, but the question for David again is probably leakage from other towns in the area, because it won't just affect Castle Douglas, it will affect other towns, but that's in the hands of the gods, I suppose, really. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Okay, there are no other questions for the case officer. We'll move on to a register of speakers. So we have first Graham Lang on behalf of the Co-op, who is or should be on Teams. Are you with us, Graham?
I am, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning, Graham. You will have 3 minutes to make your presentation. Because of the list of speakers, we'll try and stick strictly to 3 minutes. We'll not try, we will stick strictly to 3 minutes. I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go to bring the presentation to a conclusion. You've been kind enough to wait in case members have questions for you. I'd be grateful. So just whenever you're ready, Graham, thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Planning Committee. My name is Graham Lang and I am the Director of North Planning Development. Today I am representing the cooperative group who are objectors to the application, which seeks planning permission to develop a 1,881 square metre supermarket on an out-of-centre site at Oakwell Road. The Co-op has an existing supermarket at Cotton Street and are a key local employer and investor in the council's town centres. The Co-op strongly supports the officer recommendation to refuse the application before you because of the impact it will have on Castle Douglas town centre. As the committee will be aware, our town centres are vital for the country's economic, environmental and social well-being, but they face significant and well-documented challenges as we emerge from the pandemic. Castle Douglas is not immune from these challenges, but it has been successful in promoting itself as a food town, supporting a range of successful businesses, including a series of independent convenience retail operators. Against this backdrop, it is important to consider the context of the proposals before you. The proposed supermarket will provide more convenience retail floor space in a single store than currently exists across all of Castle Douglas town. There is no question that a development of this nature would have significant consequences for the businesses which contribute so much to Castle Douglas town centre. The town centre needs your support. We expect the applicants will seek to dismiss the Co-op's objections as being commercially motivated. This is why our client welcomes the council having taken its own independent advice as evidenced by your own independent consultants, the trading impacts of the proposed supermarket will be significant, and we agree with your consultants' view that the proposed supermarket represents a real threat to the town centre. The retail impacts identified by your consultants will be heightened by the significant effects on our client's own food store, which has a very strong relationship with the town centre. Trading impacts in the co-op will reduce linked trips between our client's store and the town centre, impacting negatively on town centre footfall, which helps to support so many independent traders. Incidents before you is clear. No matters which justify the approval of the proposed out-of-centre supermarket.
You have
The
30
only
seconds
reasonable
to go,
conclusion
Graham.
to be Thank you. The only reasonable conclusion to be drawn is that the proposed store will have a significant adverse impact on Castle Douglas Town Centre, with the proposals running contrary to policy ED6 of your LDP. We respectfully request that the application before you is refused for the reasons set out in the committee report. Thank you.
Thanks very much for being so concise. You had 2 minutes extra, Graham. Thank you. Questions for the co-op representative, Graham Lane? Andy McFarlane, please, and then...
Yeah, thank you, Graham, for that. One of the points you made there was about the floor space of the proposed development, and you said it was greater than the whole of the town centre. Does that include the food stores that are already there, such as your own and Tesco? Thanks.
Yeah, so the co-op store is an edge of centre store. But that figure relates to the floor space that's within the defined town centre as defined in the LDP. I think that's consistent with this data that's in the independent report prepared by your consultants.
Yeah, thank you. Just seeking that clarification. It doesn't include co-op or Tesco. Thank you.
Thank you. John Dennerley, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to get a question of clarification. Just in terms of the impact in the town centre environment, the co-op and Tesco in the centre of the town, and the Aldi and the outer centre is good for travel, so for out of town. So using A75, and just a concern in terms of affecting the impact. Sorry,
so there's concern with regards to the future competition and with regards to the stores. So what is the impact with regards to co-op regarding those concerns?
Do you need that repeated, Graham, or did you get the question?
I think I got the gist of the question. I'll try and answer it as best I can. The co-op's prime concern is the impact of the proposal, the effect that's going to have on Castle Douglas Town Centre. Our own our own review of the applicant's retail study flagged significant concerns about the scale of impact that the proposed store is likely to have on the town centre. The council's independent consultant, shared those concerns. Yes, we acknowledge that. One of the kind of judgments that will be made will relate to the potential clawback and reduction in vehicle trips that might be reduced in terms of travel patterns at the moment. But frankly, our view is that any benefits associated with that are significantly outweighed by the trading impacts that the proposed store would have on the town centre. In terms of the co-op specifically, the evidence before you clear that the co-op would take a very large hit. If the co-op store takes a large hit, there's fewer people visiting it. If there's fewer people visiting the co-op, they're not carrying out those linked trips with the town centre, which has consequential impacts for the town centre traders.
Thank you. That satisfied, John? Thank you. Any other questions for Graham? Pauline?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Graham, for your presentation. You may not be able to disclose this information or not, but can you confirm with me that the footfall has fallen for Co-op in the last 2 years in Castle Douglas or not? Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
I don't have that information to hand. Apologies.
That's fine. Okay. So there doesn't appear to be any other questions. Graham, thanks for your presentation today. Thanks for being here. Nice to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We now move on to David Burns, a supporter. This is a statement to be read out by the clerk, and again, no more than 3 minutes when you're ready.
I'll try and be concise, Chair. So the statement reads, I'm in favour of an Aldi in Castle Douglas as it will give a better value for money shopping experience to Castle Douglas, bring more visitors to the town, help those on a budget during the cost of living crisis, and cut down in travel for locals, which will help the environment and have less traffic on the A75.
Thanks, Nick. As usual, members, there are no questions on that. It's simply a statement. We next have Christine Jardine, a supporter who's on Microsoft Teams. Christine, are you with us?
Yes, I believe I am.
You are indeed. Good morning. I'm sure you'll have heard what the arrangements are. You will be given 3 minutes to make a presentation. I will remind you 30 seconds to go to bring it to a conclusion, and if you'd be kind enough to wait in case anyone has questions for you, I'd be grateful. Whenever you're ready, Christine. Thank you.
I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak regarding this application. In summary, I urge you to support it. I note the report produced by Roderick McLean Associates, which is based on forecasts of historical data. There is a more modern approach based not on forecasts, but instead on billions of banking transactions. This is a study carried out when a new Aldi opened in St Albans. I commented this study, so I know you've all had the opportunity to review it. The town's 3 major retailers have all objected, each with the defined timescales, Tesco in particular, showing a needless contempt for the planning process. Their objections are based on our local development plan, developed in 2018 and published in 2019. It is widely recognised that shoppers' habits have changed since the pandemic, but the existing plan was developed long before this. Currently, the UK is in the midst of a cost of living crisis, likely to worsen as mortgage payments climb and remain high into 2028, based on forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility. I have no doubt that sadly some shops in King Street will close over the coming months as spending money becomes tight, but that will be nothing to do with the possible arrival of Aldi. I believe it's just how capitalism works. I refer you to the article in the Glasgow Herald, dated the 10th of November 2009, entitled How the Arrival of Tesco Forced Us to Reinvent Ourselves. It provides a commentary on the situation of Castle Douglas traders 3 years after the opening of Tesco in 2006, which had itself attracted much opposition. Towns must evolve to better fit their communities. I do not have a crystal ball, but I'm prepared to contend that those communities where the discount retailer will fare best during the worsening economic crises. It would be unfortunate if the council appeared to be supporting companies with billion-pound turnovers at the expense of local families who are choosing between heating and eating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. If you just wait in case anyone has a question for you, please. Questions for Christine, the presenter, in support of this application. Councillor Barretti.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. Thank you, Chair. I'm assuming, if I get it right, you are a resident of Castle Douglas, and would you be able to tell us how many food stores are actually in the town centre of Castle Douglas?
Yes. If we're talking about major retailers in the centre in itself, there is Scotmid, which in the independent report seems to be deemed to be part of the Co-op. Other than that, there are many small retailers such as In-House Chocolates, Earth's Cross Bakery, a number of small specialist shops which befit a food town.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Any other questions, Pauline?
Oh, can't press the buzzer today. Thank you, Chair. Just if it helps the committee today, there are 3 independent butchers. Quite rightly, Christine has stated there is a Scott Mid. There are 2 independent bakers, 3 main restaurants, and possibly about 5 cafes. So that's what we have at the moment, and what there is in Castle Douglas at the moment. Thanks, Chair.
Certainly wasn't a question for the supporter, but nevertheless. Any questions for the supporter? Thank you very much for being with us today, Christine. Thank you. We now have 2 representations. Susan Curry first, a statement to be read out by the clerk, and then Kelly Patterson, who has written on behalf of Castle Douglas Community Council. So you can do them both in turn, Nick, please.
Thank you, Chair. Turning to the first one then, the statement reads, I wish to object to the proposed refusal to the above planning application for an Aldi store in Castle Douglas on the following grounds. 1, it would bring much needed jobs to Castle Douglas and the surrounding areas. 2, I used to shop regularly in Castle Douglas and use the high street shops. However, I currently shop at Aldi Newton Stewart, and whilst there use the shops on its high street. If Aldi was in Castle Douglas, I would shop there again and use the shops in Castle Douglas King Street. I'm sure there are others who currently use Aldi Newton Stewart or Aldi Dumfries who would do the same. So rather than be a threat to the retailers in Castle Douglas, I feel Aldi would be an asset and bring more people to Castle Douglas. 3, in the current cost of living crisis, Aldi would be a welcome addition, helping many families struggling at the moment, as it offers good quality produce at very affordable prices. 4, Aldi was voted Which Magazine's cheapest supermarket in 2022. I feel to deny myself and all potential future customers of the benefits of an Aldi store in Castle Douglas would be unfair and wrong. That's that statement, Chair. Moving on to the next one, from the Community Council. I write in my capacity as Secretary of Castle Douglas Community Council to give notice of the Community Council's support for the application being granted. As community representatives, we are all too aware of devastating impact that the cost of living crisis is having in our community, and not just those with lower incomes. Rising energy costs combined with rampant food inflation means that the provision of even bare essentials are beyond many. An Aldi store in Castle Douglas would greatly benefit the residents of not just Castle Douglas but also of Dalbeattie and Kirkcudbright. It would also significantly reduce the amount of car journeys from the Stewartry to Dumfries, thereby assisting with the government's aim of reducing car miles by 20%. Castle Douglas has recently experienced the closure of M&Co, one of the town's major retailers. This closure comes with associated redundancies, therefore we desperately need the jobs that this new store would provide. As members are probably aware, those of us living in the Stewartry are deeply angered by the recommendation to reject Aldi's application, and it makes us question the Council's attitude towards community councils when our views are so readily dismissed out of hand. We believe that we are the experts of our respective communities and are astonished by the sheer arrogance of outsiders telling us that they know better. What this recommendation does is demonstrate a council bias towards Dumfries at the expense of outlying areas. We feel that this is unacceptable and we urge members to vote in favour of the application being granted.
Thanks, Nick. Members, you've noted these 2 statements. We now have 3 elected members. First is Ian Howie in person. Ian, and you, I'm sure, know the rules. You will make your presentation wait for questions from members and then leave the chamber until the application has been determined. So whenever you're ready, Ian, thank you.
Members, we've been here before in 2006 when Tesco built a store in Arnesby Road. Prophecies of the demise of King Street shops came to nothing. In fact, when Lee Sparks, Professor of Retail Studies at Stirling University, reviewed the situation in 2009, there had been little impact on traders, with some stating that their businesses had actually benefited as a result. So what has changed? Not a lot. We still have a vibrant town centre where locals support 3 butchers, 3 bakers and a variety of other shops. The report raises fears of trade diversion from King Street to Aldi, but doesn't explain why such diversion isn't already catered for by Tesco's. Locals already have access to cheaper shopping should they wish. The fact that Tesco's have waded in at this late stage highlights that the main trading diversion to Aldi's will be from Tesco's and the Co-op. It's further worth noting that not a single King Street trader has objected to this application, and the most recent study reveals that 80% of those who either own or work in Castle Douglas businesses support the application. In addition, what is beyond doubt is the overwhelming public support, along with that of the Community Council and at least 2, and I suspect all 3 elected members. A clear democratic mandate in support of the application. The main reason for this support is the cost of living crisis. When LDP2 was drafted, inflation stood at 1.8%. We now have a major war in Europe and food inflation projected to reach 19%. This, combined with a trebling of energy costs, means that those suffering financial hardship are desperate for help. The situation is so bad that Valerie White, our Director of Public Health, fears an increase of mortality in low-income households. So we have the choice of paying blind obedience to a dated LDP or saving lives. In addition, we desperately need the new jobs the store would provide. The number 1 priority of this council is tackling poverty and inequality. Here we have the opportunity to do both. However, any challenge to the recommendation must be made on competent planning grounds. To that end, I request that one of you submit, if necessary, submits a motion to the effect that the socio-economic benefits provided by the new jobs is a material consideration of sufficient weight to justify departure from the LDP on this occasion. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, that you, Ian. Thank you. Well done. Okay. Questions for Ian? Ivor?
Morning, Councillor Howie. It was with regard to the, was it 2007 you said Tesco application. Can you tell me what the retail assessment said there and whether the council were in favour of approving that or refusing that?
My understanding of reading the report, it was going back to Stewartry District Council days when planning was done on a local basis. Ronnie Irvin was the planning officer at that time, and I believe the recommendation was to approve. David might keep me right on that.
Chair, was that based on a retail assessment that was questioned? The current one was questioned that we were wrong. So was it wrong the last time when we said that actually to approve it was a good one? So was the retail assessment good then and bad now from a council point of view?
I'm afraid I can't answer that. I don't know.
Any other questions for Ian? Okay. John, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And linked to what Ivor has said, and thank you very much to Councillor Howie for providing that information. So 80% of the independent retailers are supporting and say that it will benefit the town in the future. And also there'll be more income from people coming from external outside the area. So it will benefit the area going forward as well. So 80% has said that they support it. So I feel it's very positive to obviously, develop the area and increase the popularity. I think it will really help the area and the economy going forward.
believe from the survey, the latest survey, it was 82.2% of those who either had businesses or worked in business in Castle Douglas were supportive, and I believe the figure of general support was about 92.5%.
Thanks, Ian. Any other questions for Councillor Howie? In that case, thanks for your presentation, Ian, and your responses. I'll just wait until Ian leaves. Thanks, Ian. Councillor Dougie Campbell, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Morning, Dougie. You'll know the rules by now, I'm absolutely sure. 3 minutes for your presentation. I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go. And if you'd be kind enough to wait in case there are questions for you, I'd be grateful. Whenever you're ready, Dougie, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. Much of the focus has understandably this morning been on Castle Douglas residents, but I've also been contacted by many people in my own ward who currently are required to travel to Stranraer, Newton Stewart or Dumfries for discounted shopping. That's people in New Galloway, Gatehouse, Kirkcudbright, Auchencairn and every community in between who have to travel round trips of at least 40 miles plus to make ends meet. Like so many people in my ward, when my own wife and I travel from Gatehouse to Castle Douglas for the weekly supermarket trip, we invariably take advantage of visiting shops in the town, such as butchers and bakeries and a range of many other services. And I think the predicted demise of King Street is unfounded. We need to listen to customers and to shopkeepers, none of whom I believe have submitted an objection to the Aldi application. And why would they when so many people already visit their shops? And I think I'm right in saying that the premises model for Aldi doesn't have a fresh meat counter, fresh fish counter, deli counter, pharmacy or cafe. Consequently, it offers limited competition for King Street businesses, but it does offer consumers a choice. But is rural poverty really a thing here? Back in 2017, many members will remember that DAGCAS produced a report on the poverty premium and provided evidence that showed that Stewartry residents paid by far the most for the average shopping basket and was found to be more than twice as expensive as in Annan and Estill. And in the absence of any dramatic change since 2017, other than food prices rising exponentially, food and fuel poverty is embedded here already and presents a very real day-to-day struggle for our people. And in recent months, another 2 food banks have started up in the Stewartry, funded through our own Poverty and Inequalities Fund. We all know that people in our wards who are already struggling and many more are ready to fall through the cracks brought about by circumstances out with their control, and that will no doubt have ramifications for a long time to come. My statement isn't a criticism of planning officers for the recommendation to refuse the application, because at the end of the day, they're interpreting the policy we set. But I think we need to think more widely as members when the time comes to review those policies, which in this particular case seem really out of touch with the challenges our constituents are currently facing. So to conclude, I just wanted to make sure that the committee understands that this application just isn't about supermarket options for residents in Castle Douglas. It's about the socio-economic well-being of the whole of the Stewartry, giving our constituents choice and ways to make life more affordable. And I hope you'll give residents that choice today. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Dougie. Any questions for Dougie? I've got Andrew Giusti and then Ivor Hislop. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Campbell, for that. As you know, I run a butcher shop in Stranraer, and what I find with my rural customers is that they're a weekly, maybe monthly customer with me. Do you feel that these rural customers in the likes of your ward would be more likely to go to Castle Douglas more often and therefore go to the butcher shops, for example, more often than what they would if they were doing a bi-weekly or monthly shop?
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Councillor. Just I appreciate that question. Yes, absolutely. That's the very strong message that's been coming to me from my own constituents in the ward. And, you know, that's why I made reference to fuel poverty as well, because it is a very real impact on people in Ward 3 as well as it is for other wards. So that's very much, I'm in agreement with that point.
Thanks, Andrew. Ivor.
Morning, Councillor Campbell. It's just Aldi sells the planning permission next week and Waitrose move in. Do we have the same arguments then?
To be perfectly honest, Ivor, irrespective of if this application is accepted today, people will still be experiencing embedded fuel and food poverty. What the Aldi store will do, if you're minded to approve it, is provide choice, give people options, and I think that's really, really important. And also to emphasise the point that there's been lots of reference this morning to the cost of living crisis, and yeah, that's really important, but this is a situation for people in rural Galloway that they've been experiencing for a very, very long time.
Thanks, Ivor. Any other questions for Dougie? In that case, thanks very much for with us, Dougie. Thanks for your presentation. I now have a statement to be read out from Councillor John Young. Just whenever you're ready, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Planning Committee members were circulated with the results of a survey completed by over 1,500 people who shop in Castle Douglas. This survey clearly demonstrated that respondents were overwhelmingly in favour of a new Aldi store in Castle Douglas. Dumfries and Galloway Council are inviting local communities to create place plans which will offer communities the opportunity to produce a plan for their area expressing their aspirations and ambitions. In other words, communities expressed wishes in their place plan will have greater influence than the local development plan which this report relies on to justify its decision. The Castle Douglas community has clearly demonstrated a new discount store would be part of their place plan. If this application is approved, I am pleased to note the footway on the southern side should be extended to provide a tactile crossing point, but could a pedestrian crossing with lights be considered, as more and more young people are crossing this busy road to access things like the Birkland Road football facility, as well as Castle Douglas Primary School. Finally, if this application is approved, could a very short walkway stroke cycleway be considered from the westerly end of the Whitelaw housing scheme going behind the agricultural engineers to join up with the eastern edge of the Aldi site?
Thank you, Nick. And some of these suggestions would have to be put directly to the applicant by either members or Councillor Young. It's not in your gift to do that today. The application is before us and it's set out what the application is or consists of. That concludes the supporters. We now have the applicant in person, Andy Doyle and Steve Robb for Aldi Stores. If you'd like to come forward, please. Gentlemen, you will have 3 minutes shared between you. I'll remind you 30 seconds to go to bring the presentation to conclusion, and I'm sure some members will have questions for you, so it's like to wait after that. So 3 minutes, and just whenever you're ready, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning all. My name's Andy Doyle. I'm the Property Director for Aldi Stores in Scotland. I would like to take the opportunity today to furnish you with a little bit more information on our proposals for Castle Douglas. As I'm sure you'll be aware, we've been going through a period of huge expansion across Scotland and the rest of the UK, and we have developed over 104 stores in Scotland over the last few years. In the Dumfries and Galloway area, we operate 2 stores in Dumfries, 1 store in Annan and another in Newton Stewart. And you'll probably be aware that we also source a number of in-store goods from suppliers in the local area. We are very, very keen to get a store in Castle Douglas and get it open as quickly as possible. Whilst I appreciate the commentary here today that the operator may not be a material consideration, as that could change, I can assure members that we are not in the business of obtaining planning permissions for the use of our competitors, and we intend to get this store open as quickly as possible. To continue our growth and meet those increasing customer demands, we identified Castle Douglas as a target town a number of years ago. However, to date, and until we came across the site that we're now proposing, we were unable to find a suitable site. However, in clubbing two ownerships together, we were able to come up with something that was both available and suitable. Once the site was identified and initial plans were drawn up, we engaged positively with your planning officers to agree the scope of the submission. We recognise the importance of public consultation, and despite the challenges at the time with COVID-19, a comprehensive programme of engagement was undertaken virtually through an online question and answer session and through our dedicated consultation website. That was supplemented in October with an event in Castle Douglas Town Hall. Over the 3-week period in January 2022, we were pleased to receive 345 consultation responses, with over 90% of these in support, with many raising the need for more choice and more affordable shopping options. What that consultation also found was the current unsustainable pattern of food shopping of those who responded, with over 40% stating that they undertook trips to locations such as Dumfries or even our store in Newton Stewart for weekly food shopping.
You have 30 seconds to go, Andy.
These findings are backed up by our in-store surveys we took at our Glasgow Road store in Dumfries, highlighting the opportunities available to reduce those shopping miles alongside the other benefits a store in Castle Douglas would deliver, such as cutting food prices. Given the difference in the offer provided by Castle Douglas Town Centre, we do not anticipate significant competition with those independent stores. With our existing stores in areas such as Inverurie and Crieff.
Can you draw your presentation to a conclusion, Andy, please?
Examples where we can coexist very well. I hope that's been of help to you, and I'm happy to take any questions you have, and my planning consultant Stephen Robb is also on hand to assist with the slightly more technical matters. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy, and thanks for being so concise. Questions? Tony Barretti, please.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. You said 345 responses. Can you give us a breakdown as to, if possible, where did those responses generate from, geographically?
Hi there, if I can answer that one. Yeah, so as part of the consultation exercise, we sent out leaflets to over 2,000 addresses. So essentially, most of Castle Douglas, and that was through a leaflet, which allowed people to post them if they didn't have access to the internet, but also to go online and fill them out. So as part of the report of consultation, there is actually a map in the appendix to that document, which shows exactly where those people resided. The majority were from Castle Douglas, but yes, there were people from locations further afield within the catchment areas such as Dalbeattie and Kirkcudbright as well. So yeah, I probably can't explain it much more than that, but yeah, I'd probably refer you to that report and the report of consultation.
You want to come back, Tony?
Yeah, it's just a figure. You said 2,000 were sent out, so you've got 345, so that's roughly about 18% of those in Castle Douglas, and its interns then responded back to that positively. You said 95%?
Over 90%, just over 90%.
Thanks, Tony. I have Councillor Carruthers and then Councillor Stephen Thompson and then Pauline Drysdale.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. One is, have you ever, as an Aldi store, applied for a plan permission anywhere else in Scotland and not built it out, or more at the point sold on to someone else? And at 4.30, I've mentioned this earlier, but 4.30 within the report, there's almost question over your consultants. I suppose it's almost a credibility point in real terms, but I just wonder if you've got a view in regards to that. It looks like it's up to date and so on and so forth. We could perceive that, but I would imagine that yourselves will have a view. Thank you.
I'll perhaps take the first question. we've never obtained a consent for a store that we haven't delivered in Scotland. I can't speak for the rest of the UK, but I can certainly say that being the case for Scotland. In relation to my second question, I'll hand over to Steve.
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat the paragraph number you mentioned there, just so I can make sure I'm looking at the same thing, please?
Yeah, it's 4.30. I haven't got a page number. And it was a question asked Mr. Sutty earlier in regards to...
Page
Sorry,
37, if you've got the same committee papers that we have.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm the professional who produced the retail impact assessment in support of this application. I've undertaken them for over 40 odd stores for Aldi in Scotland. I'm also doing work for them in Wales and London at the moment. So yeah, I'm pretty confident that my professional opinion has support from a strong background of previous decision making. Ultimately, yes, there is a disagreement in professional opinion here. I can obviously only speak from my perspective, and I'm sure the Council's independent retail consultant, if he was here, would want to do the same. But from our perspective, a lot of the difference comes down to how under-trading has been considered in the reports. So basically, the Council commissioned a study to support their retail capacity model, which then informed the local development plan a number of years ago. From that, it indicated that there was leakage from Castle Douglas, and based on the evidence before you today, that's probably no surprise. As a result of that, the approach that was taken was to assume that leakage would never sort of be recovered back to Castle Douglas, and basically all retailers within the catchment area are under trading. Now, I don't believe the household survey information that's available is accurate enough to be able to say, well, it's the town centre that's under trading, or Tesco that's under trading, or Co-op that's under trading. In fact, the evidence from that report suggested it was mainly the Co-op that was under trading. However, the Council's retail consultant has applied it universally, even though the evidence on the ground would suggest otherwise. That is the main point of contention, because if you apply the trade diversions that we do anticipate to come from the town centre, which are very minimal, apply that in addition to the undertrading, it creates a larger level of impact. Now, that's the main bone of contention here, and we've gone backwards and forwards with the Council's retail consultant on this, and clearly there's just a difference of professional view here. I would point to Andy's, I don't think he got managed to finish his speech, but he was going to reference lots of other locations where Aldi trades alongside healthy town centres with independent stores, such as Crieff in Perth and Kinross, Inverurie, Aberdeenshire, Portobello, Edinburgh. There's numerous examples we could give. So if that's, I suppose, the only way you can really look at it is to compare with other case studies across Scotland to look for other examples to prove that some of these fears are unfounded.
Thank you. I have Stephen Thompson, and then Pauline Drysdale and David Slater.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it's just a question around paragraph 4.38 in our report, where the submission outlines the number of potential jobs, full-time equivalents, GVA, etc., as part of the submission. And there's been a few questions today about, this could be any potential retail outlet, not just Aldi, for example. So, but the one in front of us is particularly yours. So in terms of the numbers there, I'm just trying to get a sense of, would any retail outlet of this footprint generate a similar amount of full-time equivalent jobs? Is that just kind of par for the course in terms of the market for retail outlets of that size? Thank you.
It's difficult for me to answer that. Absolutely, I can't speak exactly on the operations of our competitors. I think we at Aldi are probably known for being quite an efficient operation, probably not quite as many staff as our competitors. So if anything, if you put that in the context of the sort of general average, it's probably seen as a conservative estimate. But for us, it would be 35 jobs. And as I said, if we can get consent to deliver this store, we will be delivering it. There will be no question of that having to be taken up by another retail operator.
Thank you. Pauline Drysdale.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Stephen, for your presentations. I just want to make everyone aware that there's been a lot of talk today about LDP2, ED6, which is a town centre first policy. So going back to our council's policies as well, we talk a lot about active travel and connections with town centres, and Councillor Young has alluded to that in his presentation. So I'm just going to ask, what in the past have you done with the developments of Aldi stores with regards to cycleways and active travel? So I appreciate that this is the application that's in front of us, so we probably can't look into that, but should you get the approval today, would you consider taking forward discussions with our council with regards to more active travel in and around the store? Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes, absolutely. We would be more than happy to do that. I think one of the applications we referred to previously was Creef, where we agreed with the council that we could install sort of stop facilities in our site where there might be an opportunity for the local bus to pull in, equally whether it be, you know, upgrading cycle paths or pedestrian routes, as we've already committed to as part of the application. These are all things that we can consider in order to improve linkage with the town centre. As I said earlier, our start point for that is that we don't believe that the town centre impact is quite as significant as has perhaps been relayed by the independent consultant, and indeed by the likes of Co-op and Tesco, who, you know, I would probably point out own stores are not town centre, but I'm sure members will form their own views on the concerns they've raised in relation to town centre impact and the apparent outbreak of civic mindedness.
Could I just can I just add something to your active travel point as well? I think a more local example would be in Dumfries at Maxwell Town, where there was the link put to the cycle path to the south. So I think, you know, obviously cycle parking is something that forms part of every store, because that's important, but also Aldi are particularly active in terms of putting in electric charging points, so putting in a number to start with to meet the sort of expected level of demand, but also ducting about 20 spaces more, so that in future as take-up increases, actually Aldi are already got the infrastructure there to be able to just bring them online. So active travel is really important in terms of ensuring people can get to the store via a variety of means, and it's something that we could certainly look at.
Yeah, and even just the nature
Thanks,
of our...
guys. I think we've answered the question. I've got David Slater, Andy McFarlane, and then Ivor Hislop. David Slater, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One is a question, another is probably a statement, but how many staff will Aldi employ full-time in Council Douglas? And the statement is, according to national news reports today, Aldi is not now the cheapest store on the market. Thank you.
Okay, I can take both those questions. So we're anticipating around about 35 full-time equivalent positions. It does vary slightly, as you would expect, just depending on how busy the store is. Our busier stores slightly more, quieter ones slightly less. We can't predict that exactly before we open, but it's round about that figure. I've not seen the reports that you allude to today, but what I can confirm is that we have been awarded the Which Cheapest Supermarket in 2022. We won that award for the last 7 months of the year. One of our competitors won it from January through to May. So to put it in the sporting parlance, we were 5 down with only 7 months to play, and we won the last 7 months in a row to win that award for the year. So I can only speak for last year. The last couple of weeks' data we'll need to review.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Andy McFarlane, then Ivor Hislop.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Session after that.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at point 1.9 on page 25, it says key points raised. The retail addendum can be summarised as follows. Retail review should have used the applicant's identified turnover for the store of 11.8 million rather than 14.9 million averages. This is more accurate. Can you offer a bit of clarity around that as to what figures were used and why, and what perspective using alternative figures would have made? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, I can cover that one. So I think David correctly alluded to at the start that sort of retail impact assessment work is it's not a science, it's an art form, to be honest. There's a lot of assumptions that are made, but they're based generally on sort of standardised approaches, so UK national average figures. So to try and explain that as easily as I can, average sales density, so for each per square metre of floor space, there is an expected turnover, and then you apply that by the net sales, the sales area, and that gives you the expected annual turnover. Now that's at a UK average level, so obviously that takes in some locations which are trading massively, and it takes in other sort of more rural locations where they won't be achieving that sort of national average, but it's the best you can really do in terms of retail impact assessment. The point you refer to in the report is correct in that at the start, the independent retail consultant was using figures that suggested Aldi's turnover would be 3 million higher than what we recognised, and based on the national average figures we typically use. Through that process and discussion, he agreed with us in the end that our figures were more accurate. So what that means is that the turnover of the store is expected to be less, and so when you consider trade diversions, proportionately, they would also be less on the retailers. Hopefully that answers that sufficiently.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Ivor, and then we'll go to session.
Right. It's with regard to, I think it's IRC figures of, is it 500,000 that you would draw in from the town centre retailers rather than the edge of town ones, and that was on a £2.5 million, I can't remember if it's turnover it said in here, or profit, but 20% seems quite high. You have a figure of 6% in there. Was that turnover or profits? In your one, there's a reference to 6%. That's right.
The 6% we refer to as impact. So essentially, you consider the proportion of the store's trade that will come from different locations. So we considered that the majority would come from the Tesco store, the Co-op store, and also existing locations where people are already travelling to. So the Aldi store in Maxwell Town, which we've got evidence of from our own in-store surveys, Newton Stewart, but also probably the Lidl store in Dumfries as well. And then we also considered, well, what would the level of diversion be from the town centre? And on that basis, you could, the technical way of doing it is like competes with like. So if people are going to change their shopping patterns, they'll change it from something most similar to the Aldi store, rather than something which is quite specialist and quite different. That was our thinking in the approach. So that is the difference. I don't know exactly the figures you refer to. If you've got any further questions on it, I will try and cover any further questions on it.
The other one was the taking out of or adding in of the under. I can't make sort of head or tail out of the report. It was 38% against 20%, and one was a second table which took out the underspend, or what you call it, that isn't happening. Do you agree with the view of the 20% rather than the 38 as being more accurate?
I don't agree with either of those figures. I think I agree with our 6% impact. In our view, the under trading, which I've already explained, is something that I think the household survey, which informed the independent review, but it was done for the council's retail study a number of years ago, does indicate that there's leakage. And if you compare that leakage to how much the stores on a national average level should be turning over, it does suggest there could be some under trading. However, it doesn't suggest where that's coming from and which retailers, and the approach that's been taken in the independent retail study is that it should just apply to everything, rather than saying, well, it could just be the Co-op or it could be the Tesco. Whereas we've focused more on, well, what's the national average, how should they be trading, and what would be that diversion. So yeah, I don't agree with either of those two figures that are in the independent report.
Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen. That appears to be all of the questions. Thanks for your presentation. Thanks for your responses. I'm sure they were appreciated. And that concludes all the registered speakers for this particular agenda item. So I have Councillor Dryburgh wanting to speak in session, and I have Councillor Carruthers wanting to speak in session, and then Stephen Thompson, Speaker in session.
Thanks very much, Chair. You know, it's been a long sort of discussion on clarifications on everything, and I'm sure all the members got all the emails over the last couple of weeks from the supporters and of course a couple from the objectors in this particular case. It comes to me as this is not just about Castle Douglas, this is about Stewart, this is about moving on and the surrounding areas. It's also not just about footfall in shops and things like that. It's also about the environmental impacts that we have in the area, and we've got our own policy on that particular thing. I think David said quite early on, this is not just this is about forecasting, and it's not an exact science. So therefore, do you actually listen to either of the respective reports coming back? And I look at these things about the economic viability of the high street, and I've seen what Aldi did to Annan, and actually people come from Gretna, for Springfield, for East Riggs and all around, and they actually come into Annan to Aldi and they go down the high street after it. And I would presume that would be the case, because many of the emails that we had from many of the supporters said that rather than go down the high street after Aldi and Dumfries, they would go down the high street in Castle Douglas after that. I'm minded to approve the application, Chair, as an exception to policy in specific ED 1A and ED 6 on the economic and environmental benefits and the positive impacts that this would actually have of the application. I would disagree with some of the suggestions that there would be a negative impact. I believe there would be a positive impact. And the conditions that these go forward on would be agreed by officers on this type of application, because as David said, it is a different type of application to a housing application, and we want to make sure that those conditions would move forward. So I would suggest that we approve the application as an exception to policy, specifically ED 1A and ED 6, on the economic benefit and the cumulative positive effect that it would actually have to the area and Castle Douglas in particular, Chair.
Thank you. I'll have the rest of the speakers in, then I'll ask David if that's an acceptable proposal. I'm sure David will have some suggestions about conditions if members are minded to approve this application. Councillor Carruthers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for giving me a chance to come and certainly put my point across. I think Archie's outlined what I'm certainly feeling. Happy to either support or second whatever it takes in regards to that, like see this application. But I mean, 4.30, as David highlighted at the beginning, is the crux of the matter. I do believe, I've got no reason at all to disbelieve, I should say, the most recent report taken into what's been mentioned earlier again is that we've had a COVID, we've had the Ukraine war, we've had the cost of living crisis, all the different things that have happened since then. I think there's a material change. And as part of my own question, what was outlined quite clearly, but it's the main impact will be on co-op, which is unfortunate. It's capitalism, as one of the representatives said, not actually the town centre. I've no reason to disbelieve that whatsoever. The new LDP 3 will bring all this up to date, I'm sure, and regularise this, but more than happy to support, by the way, a second, and if required, only Archie's motion if it was a motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ian, because I think Archie specifically didn't mention cost of living crisis, because that doesn't really fit the current motion that's on the table, but some folk have that opinion. It might not last the length of the store if it's approved today. But anyway, so you're seconding Archie's motion as it stands, Ian, I would expect. I've got Stephen Thompson next.
Thank you, Chair. I think as much as possible I've tried to think about this in material planning terms, because there's been, hundreds of representations that everybody's inbox has suffered from, etc. And it's clear that there's a lot of very real-time issues. As David said, it was temporal in a lot of respects earlier. And having listened to the debate and heard from the answers back from officers and others in terms of the studies that have been carried out, I think at best it makes me call into question the reliability of any of the forecasts. That's not saying we shouldn't carry those forecasts out, so I'm not even sure that this we could safely say this would be contrary to ED6 affecting the town centre, because we don't really know. However, that aside, I think that irrespective of that, I think we've established today as well, whoever opens a retail unit on that site of that size is going to create circa 35 jobs. Now, to me, that outweighs, and maybe that's under OP1, because I'm not clear which ED reference that would fall under, maybe David can advise later. But I certainly think on balance, on those material planning grounds and in what's in the report, I think there's enough weight, given the speculation around the forecasts that we've established, that carries it for me, whether that's an exception to policy ED6 or whether ED6 has been called into question so much that it doesn't really stand as a reason for refusal. So I'd be happy to take a wee bit of guidance on that, and if there were conditions, I think it's sort of outlined in terms of the roads officers, mentioned a few under formalising the existing access, etc., the footways on the south side to tactile paving, crossing points, all the rest of it, and also the contaminated land remediation. But I'm sure that's something that officers would be probably better able to advise. Thank you, Chair.
So you're in favour of the proposal Archie put forward?
My only question is around the ED6 part. I don't know on hearing what I've heard today that there's actually a sufficient reason to class that as a...
I'll ask David to clarify, but there's no point in a bun fight if you've got a proposal in front of you.
Well, I'm just trying to get it right, Chair. Do you know what I mean? So I'll put that out there and then we'll get to the decision at the end.
I'll get the rest of the speakers and I'll come back, Stephen. I have Pauline Drysdale.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just before I start, the material comments objecting to the proposal are marked A to K. So this is just a statement for members so that we've all got the correct facts. I'd like it noted by all members that on further research, the objections A to I are all made by just two objectors, one competitor and one individual. But putting that aside, as already alluded to, this is about the rocketing price of food brought about by the war in Europe, COVID and other factors. We are being recommended to reject an application which would greatly assist the impoverished from ease of accessing cheaper food, and I'm not prepared to do that. A survey was recently carried out, as we all know, by Councillor John Young, with over 1,565 responses. In my experience as a councillor, there's never before been such a strongly fuelled response in favour of a new development, a store that will give fairer consumer choice and options during this challenging economic period. Jobs within D&G are scarce, and the recent South of Scotland Business Panel survey from SOCI in October and November 2022 has revealed that the optimism and confidence has been impacted across the whole region. We know from working alongside the food bank teams and the food train during COVID and afterwards how much hidden poverty there is in the Stewartry. And with 6 low-cost discount retailers in D&G, 1 in Annan, 3 Dumfries, 1 Stranraer, 1 Newton Stewart, and a 7th in the next item on our agenda, on the edge of Dumfries, where we're being advised to approve, I would question if any of these were recommended for refusal. We know that D&G has the lowest wages in the country and that the Stewartry has the most expensive shopping basket in the region, almost double that of Wigtonshire, which has 2 discount superstores. The reduced carbon footprint has already been mentioned, and the additional jobs providing economic benefit which could potentially be provided, many for women who are also part-time carers. The CCDF, the Community Council and ourselves as local councillors are working hard to promote better signage and active travel in Castle Douglas alongside a new market town initiative to promote our vibrant livestock market, the monthly producers market and our much loved independent shops providing locally sourced produce. Finally,
I take it, Paul, have you got a proposal
yes,
at the end of this?
I do, Chair. If I'll just continue, I'm nearly finished. Thank you. Finally, Valerie White, the Region's Public Health Chief, stated that household food and fuel poverty could lead to more deaths this winter. Affordable shopping and, very importantly, the creation of jobs is paramount. We recognise and fully accept the strength of feeling that exists within our community regarding this planning application, and I urge you not to leave the Stewartry on the short shelf life corner today. So, members, I wish to either support Archie's motion, because I probably need clarity from David if my motion is acceptable, or I would support Archie's if it is two and one of the same thing. So I was going to suggest a motion to the effect that the socio-economic benefits provided by the new jobs and associated short-term construction employment is a material consideration of sufficient weight to justify departure from LDP2 on this occasion. So whether that's a separate
Is that
motion
different
or
from
an
Archie's or
amendment.
the same, David?
Same, that's
It's the
fine.
same.
So I would support that motion from Archie. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, are there any? Ivor?
Chair, it's a wee bit of clarification. Based on what's been said, as members, are we competent to take the decision on putting socio-economic issues as a higher material consideration than the other planning issues? Is that acceptable? Just so that I know which way I might go when it comes to voting.
David?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a lot of stuff talked about there, which obviously my role here is to advise you about planning matters. What you have to consider is the long-term use of land. None of us in this room, I think, could have forecast 4 or 5 years ago the pandemic, the current cost of living crisis, other things going on in Eastern Europe. That really isn't something which you can take forward as part of the consideration of this application. What was said by Councillor Dryborough, I think, did kind of hit the nail on the head. I would say to Councillor Thompson on this one that I think you do have to factor in ED6 and take it as an exception to policy by virtue of the fact that both parties, both consultants in this, are accepting there will be some effect on the town centres. It's just the level of effect. No, I've been scribbling down rapidly, hearing all the debate. What I would suggest that you're wanting to say is that you are wanting to approve this as an exception to policy ED6 and indeed ED1A in terms of industrial land, as an exception to those policies, because any potential adverse impact on the town centre of Castle Douglas would be offset by the socio-economic benefits of net job creation. I think that's the important thing. It's net job creation that you're looking at. Construction, that's temporary, and it wouldn't necessarily be local people that are carrying it out. But even accepting that there might be some stores that will close as a result of this, the net job creation from the development and the sustainability benefits of the reduction of the need to travel by car out with the Stewartry catchment area are such that you'd want to support it.
So it seems everybody understands that, and at the moment we've not got an alternative proposal. Councillor Carruthers, I've seen your hand up and then down again. Are you content with what's being said now?
Yeah, I'm content with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ian. Pauline?
I would be content with that once it was read back out, just so it's clear to us all if that's okay, Chair. But also, is this a relevant point to discuss potential conditions that we might want to put in as members?
David's got a list of them. I'm just wondering whether or no we have a vote, whether or no somebody wants to propose that we actually support the case officer, because after, well, you want to support the case officer? So the case officer...
I don't think you are.
The recommendations to refuse, that's the case officer. So we've got the proposal, got the language. If there's any move, because I'd be happy to support the case officer. There is a case here. It's been quite well laid out, and we are ignoring our own planning policies, and we're ignoring Scottish planning policy, and there's a reason given why we should depart from policy. I'm happy to propose that we go with the officer's recommendation. You want to support that, Pauline? Well, you need to go that way then. That's the way you go.
Getting mixed up with David and the new motion. Sorry, everyone.
So I don't have a second if we're going with the officer's recommendation, it would appear. In which case, we need to sort out what the proposal is, and then David will have some conditions that you might suggest that you would want to add just to protect the wider community and other businesses. David, it would appear there's a strong support for this proposal.
Yes, Chair. I mean, if it would help, Councillor Drysdale, I'll read back out what I'd scribbled down rapidly. It's the, I suppose it is a motion. It is to...
Motion by Councillor Driver,
yep.
Seconded by Councillor Carruthers. And Councillor Drysdale just wanted to ensure that the language encapsulated what she was trying to present to the committee. And I think that this is the direction this time, Pauline? Okay.
Basically boiling it down to what I think would be a safe decision to make in terms of it being on planning matters, that the committee wishes to approve the application as an exception to policies ED6 and ED1 on the basis that any potential adverse impact on the town centre of Castle Douglas would be offset by the socio-economic benefits of net job creation from the development and the sustainability or economic environmental benefits of the reduction in the need for car travel out with the Stewartry catchment area. And wholly anticipating what you would do today, I have a whole list of conditions here. I know you so well. Scribble them down. There's a number of roads conditions that were recommended that are online. Those come down to things like the provision of car parking, visibility displays at the entrance, the need for off-site accommodation works that I showed you in the slides earlier being sorted out. And what was the other one I got? Oh, it's just to do with the access again. So those would be fairly straightforward. There was also, I noted throughout the report, there was conditions recommended about hours of delivery and then plant and equipment noise levels, the need for details of external lighting, the need for the landscaping that's being proposed to be implemented, no tree clearance during bird breeding season, and treatment of Japanese knotweed on the boundary, and then the contaminated land. Officer suggested a couple of conditions as well. So that was all the ones I noted from the report. But obviously members are entitled to add any other conditions.
Members, I hope we would add that officers would consult with the ALDI representatives on the other undertakings they agreed to make, although it's no part of the condition here that Councillor Young requested. Ivor, did you want to come in?
Chair, it's maybe the next one that I read it in. Was there something about the amount of convenience against comparison goods that was it 80-20%, or is that the next one? Have I got this?
David?
You know, because you could actually affect more stores in the town centre if you actually have more comparison goods in there rather than convenience goods. Just wondering if that's something that we could consider.
It is obviously a food store that's been applied for. I'm sure all of you will have at some point been in an Aldi store, and there's a very standard format that you have of the food and then the central aisle with certain non-food items. But the percentage of the overall building is fairly standard from store to store, and it's not a significant part of it. So unless you really felt strongly, I wouldn't want to get, because then you get into enforcement issues that are planning inspectors to go out and with a tape measure and see how much percentage is actually being complied with or not. So I really wouldn't want to get down that way if we didn't have to.
So having heard what David has said, and I know Stephen wants to come in, we'll be delegating the conditions to our case officer, including the engaging with Aldi about the two undertakings they made about footway and cycleway, etc. Stephen? You okay with that? Okay. Right, it seems with my proposal receiving no support that there's an agreement of the committee to approve this application. I won't ask Nick to read it out again. David's been quite thorough in how the wording was, and that'll be sorted out once the meeting's concluded. Safe to say that approval has been granted for this development. Thinking it would be a short meeting, I didn't order lunch today. It's 12:30. John needs a break, as does his interpreters. Do you want half an hour or 10 minutes and get back into business because we don't have lunch sorted? 10 minutes, okay. 10 minutes, John? Half an hour it is. We'll see you back here at 1 o'clock exactly. Good afternoon, members. Welcome back. We'll move on to agenda item number 5, an application to develop land without compliance with condition 9 attached to planning permission 00/P/3/0/0166 to allow for the sale of Class 1 retail convenience goods together with unrestricted sale of Class 1 retail comparison goods from up to 30% of the floor space at Unit 3 and part of Unit 4, Cuckoo Bridge Retail Park, Glasgow Road, Dumfries. This is a Section 42 application. Reference number 22/0854/S42. Recommendation is subject to conditions. And again, it would have been Andrew Robinson, but David's taken us through this presentation. So David, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is before yourselves because I considered that, given the history of the site at Cuckoo Bridge Retail Park, together with the fact there was considerable discussion at your November meeting on Unit 5 within the same development, felt it was appropriate and expedient to put it before yourselves. Looking at the slides, basically you've got the retail park there. You can see the red line. It's pretty much in the centre of the retail park. And it is for Units 3 and part of Unit 4. That'll become clearer in the next slide. So you've got Unit 3 in its entity, and then what's proposed is to take probably about a third of that unit as well for back of house. Existing elevations, you'll note in the report that there is a separate application for external alterations, and that's going to be dealt with separately depending on what happens today. Photos which Andrew took, I assume in the summertime because it's a nice blue sky that day. At that time, Pound Stretcher clearly was open. I had a wander around at the weekend, and units 3, 4 and 5, Pound Stretcher, what was Story Carpets and Laura Ashley are all vacant at the moment. So that's an update to paragraph 1.2 is it says it's currently occupied. It's not currently occupied, it's currently vacant. And again, similar photo looking the other way where you've got Dunelm Mill next door and Home Base beyond it. So also, as stated this morning, whilst the application is by the owner, it's understood to be on behalf of the food warehouse, which is part of Iceland. And to maybe oversimplify it, it's almost like a bulk version of Iceland. But as I explained before, and in paragraph 4.28 of this report, basically the planning permission runs with the land, so it could be used by anyone. So it's an existing building in an existing retail park. All that's being looked at is to vary the condition. And really this comes back down to the original permission requiring bulky goods to be at that site. There's been a sequential assessment undertaken by the applicants, as you'll see on page 59 and 60. They looked at 11 sites in the town centre of Dumfries to actually see what alternatives there were, and Andrew's report concludes that really none of them were either suitable for what they were requiring or available. And the assessment of the impact on the town centre with this one is all of 0.4% negative. And the greatest effect is almost undoubtedly going to be on the Tesco store immediately adjacent. It's set out in paragraph 420. And there would also be a qualitative deficiency addressed if this was to be assessed. So the loss of bulky goods provision can be justified in this case because of the marketing attempts have been made but have been proven to be unsuccessful, that there is no interest. And was alluded to this morning that the market has changed. People tend not to buy bulky goods at retail parks now. There's a lot more buying these sort of goods online. So The positive side of it, the socio-economic benefits of it, it would bring back 1.5, well, 2 effectively, vacant units back into use. It would provide about 30 new jobs. In assessing this, obviously, if it's approved, it would be a whole new grant of planning permission. So you have to look at what conditions would be appropriate. And you'll see that Andrew's gone through what the existing conditions were and really concluded that there's only 1 or 2 of them that would still be relevant. You've got a new condition, number 1, that is now, as a result of change in national legislation, would need to be on. Then you've got condition 2 is effectively the variation which has been requested for condition 9 of the original permission. And the other one that's being passed across is condition 3. You'll note that there's also a recommendation here as well for number 4 about cycle parking. Now, I know historically in the past, for example, with school buildings, I've said really if it's only alterations to the building, you can't reasonably attach a condition. I think it is reasonable to attach it here by virtue of the fact that the existing authorised use is for bulky goods. So with the best will in the world, you're probably not going to carry a washing machine on your back on a bike. But if it's a food shop, then I think you reasonably could. So I think that's why Andrew has recommended that that condition be put on here. But with all that on board, the recommendation is to approve subject to those conditions. Happy to answer any queries, Chair.
Thanks, David. There's questions for our case officer. It appears there are none. There are no registered speakers, so we're in session. Ivor and then Ian Howie.
Chair, move recommendations.
Councillor Howie.
Second.
Thank you. Any alternative proposals? In that case, it's unanimously agreed. Thank you, members. Just confirm the decision, please, Nick.
The decision is to approve the application as per the recommendations and conditions in the report.
Thank you. Move on to agenda item number 6. An application for A, planning permission, and B, listed building consent for installation of 18 roof-mounted solar panels with associated inverter and meter at 36 George Street, Dumfries. The application type is A, a full application, and B, listed building consent. Reference number is A22/2266/full and B 22/1940/LBC. Recommendation is to approve subject to condition A and B simply approve unconditionally. Jamie Mackenzie isn't available today, so David's taking us through this report as well. So just whenever you're ready, David, please.
Thank you, Chair. This one is before yourselves purely because of a call-in from Councillor Walters as set out in paragraph 1.1. So what you have here is a 2.5-storey with basement mid-terraced property on George Street in Dumfries, and it's a category B listed building and sits within the conservation area. And what's proposed are 18 solar panels on the inverter and meter inside the building. So we'll just run through the slides. So it's existing block plan, just looking down on the roof. You can see there's a single dormer on the front elevation there. Much the same. Really the existing and proposed internal alterations are pretty minimal. It's only just the inverter and the meter that would be going inside. The bulk of the interest in this one is on the exterior. It's on the roof. You can see it's actually a surprisingly shallow roof pitch. It's around 30 degrees, which normally for slate you'd expect it to be about 40, 45 degrees. So that actually acts in favour of this proposal. So the solar panels would be arranged like that on the rear elevation facing into the courtyard. It's just showing where the inverter and meter would be. That's the elevations of what it would look like on the rear elevation. A 2D elevation like that doesn't really give a proper representation of what it would look like in 3D, and hopefully the photos will show that a little better. So that's the front elevation where you won't see anything from this elevation at all. But you can see there's a pend there which you would have to go through to get to a private courtyard in the middle, which is the only point in which I think you'll be able to see it. And that's a view from inside the courtyard, so you can see that it's actually quite a shallow roof pitch even from within the courtyard. And there again, I've tried to put together what is the existing photo and the proposed elevation, so you can see that it's slightly unflattering and unrepresentative of what it would be like from a human perspective at ground level. And then there's just a couple of photos to show what is visible from the rest of the courtyard. So I did go and have a wander around at the weekend. I honestly don't think that you would be able to see that roof pitch and the solar panels from any exterior point other than within the courtyard. I certainly couldn't see any in George Street, Castle Street or Buccleuch Street, or even the little car park which exists on George Street. Accordingly, I don't believe it's going to have any adverse impact on the character of the conservation area. And in terms of the listed building, what is proposed is reversible, so it does no long-term damage from the perspective of the character of the listed building. And you'll notice Historic Environment Scotland don't have any objections or comments to make on it at all. I did mention as well in the report here about National Planning Framework 4 being now a material consideration. And if anything, I think the policy 2C within there, which is set out in your paragraph 4.8, if anything, gives greater weight to this, because that's for development proposals to retrofit measures to existing developments that reduce emissions or support adaptation to climate change will be supported. So if anything, NPF 4 gives greater weight to this. So the recommendation for both applications is to approve standard time limit on the planning permission, but unconditional for the listed building consent. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, David. Questions for our case officer? Keith Walters, please.
Yeah, I raised this just because I was just interested to see how solar panels could fit into the conservation area. I wonder if you could I could ask a couple of questions. One is Muse Lane a private lane, or is it I thought it was a public road? And the other thing is, are you taking into account the views from the other buildings that surround that court, which will be able to see the panels on top of the roof?
David?
I honestly don't know about the ownership of Muse Lane. It's certainly not an area that is inviting for the public to wander into, because it is a sort of enclosed courtyard. Unless you had a reason to be in there, I don't think you would go in there. Sorry, what was the second point again about the...
The second point was about the view from the other buildings within that court.
Yes, often things are visible from other buildings, but is that really going to be having an effect on the character of the conservation area? Most people would take the view that the conservation area is what is visible to members of the public wandering around. It would be visible from certain points within the courtyard, but again, there's support from National Planning Framework for being a material consideration now that gives support to retrofitting these sort of developments. So I think it's something that we're just going to have to get used to seeing on a lot more listed buildings.
You happy with that, Keith?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you. I think it's worth saying as well, I know in where I live, it's a conservation area, and the frontage is far more sensitive than the rear. Sky, for example, they're allowed to install dishes on the rear listed buildings, but not in the frontage where it's highly visible. So probably that's the reason why these things were designed for the rear of this particular property. Councillor Beretti, Tony?
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if I can ask David to bring up some of the photos again of the rear of the building. Clearly, the lighting conditions when the photographs were taken, right, that one's okay. It's clearly slate, and is it dark slate, grey slate, what is it?
Looks like Welsh.
Yeah, I would maybe you can, it doesn't really help either. It's just fairly traditional, I would say probably Welsh slate as well.
Yeah. Can I suggest that? I've probably been here before. I know this is an issue which can upset people to see panels, and it's usually what makes them visible is the silver frame. And I would like to see if this is fine to have a stipulation that black framed panels, PV, are used as opposed to silver, because then that makes them almost invisible because they just meld into the background of the roof.
It's a request for a condition, David. That's
yeah,
it is a condition. Inclined to support it, and I don't know whether we can condition such a thing, because it might depend upon the equipment that's manufactured. I was thinking as well, if it's no Welsh, it's Lancashire, but it looks like Welsh to me, so
yeah.
There'll be a subtle difference in the colour.
Yeah, Chair, sorry if I can just expand on that. There's the architecture for fitting is immense, and being slate, you can have a slim fitting. So you don't have a chunky fitting, just a slim fitting and black panels, and you would be struggling to actually notice them at a distance.
Okay, so that was a question for the case officer. We'll go back to that when we're in session. Ian Howie, please.
David, I was just wondering, in the same building, the photographs, did it actually have a dormer, this building at the front?
David?
Yes, indeed it did.
So that's a lot more visibly intrusive than what's proposed at the rear.
David?
Yes, I would concur with that view. And maybe just to try and answer Councillor Barretti's comment, I think, because I wouldn't want to condition it to being something that we don't know can actually be delivered. I would hope that there are ones out there that would fit in this particular location with the dimensions they have. I would suggest, instead of specifying black, just in case that isn't an option, it just be non-reflective. And I think that was the wording.
Delegate it to office.
Yeah.
Delegate it to officers, because David now knows what the feeling was. Certainly you, as Tony, I would presume there'll be a sympathy among members as long as we're happy to support the principle of solar panels, and we'll delegate that to David or whatever the case, or with Jamie or whoever the case officer is. Have you finished with your question, Ian? Yes, answer it. Okay, brilliant. So we're still at questions for our case officer. Any other questions? In that case, members, we are in session. John and then Ivor.
Happy to approve this, and I wouldn't like to put any unnecessary conditions on when it comes to the solar panels, but approve it as is. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Ivor.
Happy to support Councillor Campbell, but I think Councillor Howie hit it on the nail. The flat roof dormer is worse than the solar panels.
Okay, so that's without another condition.
No, I'll go with that. It will take time for people to get their heads around this.
Okay, we might just allow David the luxury of speaking to the applicant to see if we can find some way that will satisfy the question that Tony has set.
Chair, if it would help, I'm more than happy to put a directive on it to say it shall be non-reflective. Rather than a condition, just in case there is an issue with availability.
Councillor Campbell's nodding in agreement. So is Ivory happy with that, gentlemen? Thank you. Okay. On that note, can we agree the recommendation as set out the directive attached? Nick, is it worth stating what we've agreed?
I think you've encapsulated it there, Chair, and the planning officer's confirmed that he'll place a directive on it, suggesting that the panels be of a non-reflective material / framework around them.
Many thanks, Nick. We move on to agenda item number 7, which is an appeal decision for information and noting only for the erection of a dwelling house at North Cowshaw, Shield Hill, Lockerbie. Planning application principle, and the reporter has dismissed our notice of refusal and approved the application. Is that right, David? So it's for notice, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Just a very quick one. Normally, or historically, in the recent past, there's generally been quite a high correlation between officers' recommendations and those which don't succeed at appeal. I was just sort of wondering, in terms of professional pride or whatever, how much of an impact does this have on David's team? Because this must be one of a very few that actually this would be the outcome. Thank you.
I think David was quite disappointed at the outcome. Do you want to respond, David?
It is really for noting, but yeah, I know the case officer disagreed quite strongly with the reporter's findings, but some you win, some you lose.
Okay, members, thank you for your forbearance and for the length of time we took in determining the first application, but it was worthwhile, and I'm sure the Castle Douglas community will be satisfied, or the majority of them, with the outcome. So thank you for your attendance today. I have no other business. Safe journey home.